Yeah, so this may be a very short business meeting, and I'm not really sure how quick this Bible study part's going to go, because we could really get wrapped around the axle with everything. It'll be good? Okay. Well, how about we start out with a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. So here we go. Father in heaven, we just thank you for our time together. I thank you for my brothers and sisters here. I thank you for their heart's desire to know you, to know your word, and to be just obedient and active and just willing, Lord, to carry out your word in a lost and dying world. We just pray that you'll help us to be the lights that the sermon talked about this morning, and that we'll show others that you are the way, the truth, and life, Lord Jesus. We just thank you for this time. We thank you for it in your name. Amen. Okay, so how many were here this morning? Everybody here this morning? Okay, heard the sermon? Yep. Yep.
Epiphany's guy he was talking about. Was that the one?
Yeah. That's the one. So he basically described Daniel chapter 8.
Yeah.
So I was somewhat kind of floored by listening to him just go through that from the most kind of obscure start, when he just talked about, hey, Jesus is the light of the world. That was his sermon, and he has commissioned us to be the lights of the world. From there, he basically summarized Daniel chapter 8 and used the conclusion of Antiochus Epiphanes' life, which was the restoration of the temple and the lighting of the menorah. That was what opened the temple back up. He used that as his example for us to be lights. And I was like, man, there's no way somebody just thought that up. There's no way. Our pastor was sick. We got a guy from about an hour out to come give a sermon, and he lays the summary of Daniel chapter 8 in front of us. I was like, anyway, it was pretty much a divine appointment, and I think it was very, very interesting how he relayed that to us being lights of the world. Okay. So I do want to spend a little more time, since the Lord kind of arranged that. I want to spend a little more time in Daniel chapter 8, because as quick as we went through it last week, we really didn't do it justice on what the message of Daniel chapter 8 is, what the role of Antiochus Epiphanes was in that chapter, and how he laid the prototype for what's going to be in the future. And he even spoke to that, didn't he? He even spoke to the fact that Antiochus Epiphanes was an example, and that there would one day be a real Antichrist to follow the temple in the same way, and we would recognize him by the fact that we have studied this passage of Scripture. So I want to spend a little more time studying. But to start, I want to go back to this passage of Scripture, and I want to use it to illustrate the points I want to make out of Daniel chapter 8. Okay, so this is Matthew chapter 24. Can anybody tell us what Matthew chapter 24 is all about? Anybody know? It's all in red. So this is a discourse of Daniel, right? Or of Jesus, right? So Jesus was answering a question. Anybody remember what the question was that he was answering in Matthew 24? Yeah, exactly. Lord, you've told us all these things, so when are you going to come back? You've told us that all these things are going to happen. How will we know the sign of the end? How will we know you're about to come back? And this is what he says. Okay? And just as he gets started explaining what it's going to be like just before he arrives, he makes this statement in verse 15. So, he says, so, when you see the abomination of desolations spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, there's a parenthesis there. Let the reader understand. And let those who are in Judea flee the mountains. Let the one who's on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house, and let the one who's in the field not turn back to take his cloak. Okay, so there's an urgency when this event happens. The real interesting point is what Jesus says in the parentheses. What does he say? Pay attention. Yes. He says, hey, you better pay attention. And you better use some real critical thinking here. Because what Daniel spoke about the abomination which causes desolation, about how he's going to stand in the holy place, is going to be very tough to decipher. Really what that says. You better go back and think through it. I particularly think these disciples who heard this, I bet they spent a lot of time with Daniel after this segment. I cannot imagine them not going back to the book of Daniel regularly and saying, what did he mean? Okay? Because we even saw last time when we looked in 2 Thessalonians, there's lots of things swirling around in their culture. Jesus isn't really the Christ. That's why he was crucified. Right after Jesus was crucified, hey, Jesus has already come again. We missed it. You made lots of deceptions and lots of confusion going on in their culture. So, I bet they spent a lot of time in the book of Daniel. Okay, don't you? As he says, let the reader understand. So we need to spend the time in Daniel as well. So we're going to go back to Daniel chapter 8. We'll spend a little bit of time kind of reviewing, and then I want to give you some dates, and then talk about really the interpretation. We'll probably spend a little bit more time in the interpretation compared to the time in the vision. So this chapter breaks into two parts, right? We looked at when Daniel received the vision, and then when Daniel encountered Gabriel, the angel, to help to interpret the vision, right? And we spent most of our time probably in the vision itself. When was Daniel writing this? It says there in the first chapter, it was in the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar. That's 551 BC. So everything that's going to be in this chapter is future for Daniel. Okay? Matter of fact, it's so future, he's not going to see most of it, or probably any of it. So 551 BC, he receives this vision. It's not until 539 BC, so some years later, that even the first part of this begins to take fulfillment. Okay? And that is the reign of the Medo-Persian Empire. They're only the first part of this. So many years later, Cyrus and Darius the Mede take over Babylon, and there Daniel starts to form in his mind the understanding of just the first part of this, and that is, who is the ram? As you remember this vision, he was at the Ula Canal, and behold, there was a ram, verse 3, standing on one bank of the Ula Canal. And the ram had 2 horns. Okay? And one horn was higher than the other, representing the Persian Empire. The short horn represented the Medo Empire. And then he saw the fact that the ram was charging east, west, and south, west, north, and south. That's kind of the pattern he conquered the Babylonian Empire. Nobody could stand before him. And then he sees the male goat. Okay? Who's the male goat? We're told later he is Alexander the Great. Well, he's the Greek Empire. First of which, the male goat had a single horn on his head, and he was Alexander the Great, the first horn. And it says that the goat attacks the ram. So I want to ask a first question. Why in the world would the Greek Empire attack the Persians and the Medes? Anybody know your history? It's a good question, right? I mean, there's some violence here going on where this goat begins to attack this ram. It says he came to the ram with 2 horns, was standing on the bank of the canal, and ran at him with a powerful wrath. You have to ask yourself a question, why would the Greek Empire have powerful wrath against this Middle Eastern country? They're a long ways away from the Middle Eastern country. So here's a couple of dates to remember. In 490 BC, Darius the Great, who is not Darius the Mede, but Darius the Great was the king of the Mede Empire, he tried to conquer Greece. And he dealt a heavy blow to Greece. He was trying to expand his empire beyond the Middle East. And Darius went there and attacked them and killed many, many Greeks. He was unsuccessful at taking over their country, but he dealt quite a blow. So 490 BC, Darius the Great attacked them. Then in 480 BC, Xerxes, who is a Persian, also attacked Greece. So in 10 years, they got attacked by both the Medes and the Persians. Many, many Greeks were killed. So let me ask you, how do you think Greeks feel about Persians and Medes? How would you feel if somebody come and killed your ancestors? Not too kindly, would you? Okay? Well, that's what happened. So when King Philip, who reigned in Greece, when he died, his son Alexander took over. And guess what he hated the most? Persians and Medes. And it was 2 years into his reign that he launched his first campaign to go attack the Babylonian or the Medo-Persian Empire. So by 334 BC, he had conquered it all. 3 battles, he wiped them all out. This is how much he hated the Persians and the Medes because of how they treated his ancestors. Guess who his tutor was? A man by the name of Aristotle. Anybody know who Aristotle is? He's basically the creator of all Greek mythology. He's the great Greek mythological author. He was Alexander's tutor. They were also not only into Greek mythology, they were also into, what do they call that zodiac stuff? Astrology. Alexander's zodiac sign was the Capricorn. Anybody Capricorns? Anybody keep any Capricorns? You know what's the symbol of the Capricorn? The goat. That's why he's the goat here. Well, that's one of the correlations of why he's the goat. So by 320-ish, he had conquered the entire Medo-Persian Empire. And now you got the Hellenistic Empire, which is the brass. Remember, go back here with the brass abdomen starting into the thighs, and the leopard that Daniel saw in his vision. Those are the two things that he equates to by 331 BC. He died in 323. So we're back here now. Remember, the ram broke. Let's see. The goat was exceedingly great. He was strong. The great horn was broken. Here in verse 8. And there came up from him 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. So in 323 BC, Alexander died. He was a young man. He died in a drunken rage. I don't know. I couldn't really figure out how he died, but he died in this drunken rage. And these 4 generals took over what he had conquered in all of the Middle East. So as far as Egypt to the south, as far as Syria to the north, everything in the east, what is now Iraq and Iran he had conquered, and even as far up through Turkey he had conquered. Of course, he came from Greece, way to the north. And these 4 generals fought over that. They spent 20 years fighting over that. There was 4 of them: Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. They took Macedonia and Greece, which is way over to the west. That was Cassandra. Lysimachus, he took Thrace and Bithynia, which is basically the kind of the northern part. Cassandra took Macedonia and Greece to the west. The northern part was like Turkey. Ptolemy, he took the south, which is Egypt. And Seleucus, he took Syria and everything to the east. And from Seleucia, we get back here. Out of him then came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. So the south being Egypt, towards the east being Babylon, what he had in Syria, and towards the glorious land. And we talked about that last week, which is what? Israel. All right. And he grew great, even to the hosts of heaven, and some of the hosts, and some of the stars, the little horn, threw down to the ground and trampled them. And he became great, even as great as the prince of the host. Now that's a real confusing passage, right? There's kind of a double meaning there. The fulfillment of this is Antiochus Epiphanes, who in 175 BC took over the Seleucian Empire and began to tried to expand it to the south. He got beat in Egypt, so he didn't get that done. He tried to expand it to the east into Asia, like India. He didn't get that done, got beat, so guess where he turns his attention? By 174, 73 BC, he focuses solely on Israel. Brother Brian gave a great synopsis of what happens between 175 BC and 134 BC when Antiochus Epiphanes spent his life destroying and decimating Israel. He was an evil dude. So the double fulfillment of this verse here is the fact that he was a very spiritually evil dude. And the spiritual battle that's going on between the archangels that protect Israel and all the demons that want to destroy Israel is certainly meant there. But that's not the only fulfillment. The stars and the prince of the hosts are really two kind of symbolic meanings for Israel and its high priest. Okay, so let me try to recall something. You remember the promise God made to Abraham? What did he promise him? He would make a great nation. What symbology did he use to represent that great nation? Yes, he took him out in Bethel at night and he said, "Hey, Abraham, look up." And he said, "Look at the stars. Can you count them?" And of course not. He said, "Your descendants are going to be like this. These are the stars in the sky. This is Israel. And one day I will let them have this land." So he's standing in Israel. He's standing in Jerusalem, the glorious land, when God makes that promise. He said, all these stars are your descendants. These are the ones that Antiochus Epiphanes is going to trample on. And he spends almost 40 years doing that. He described it. Antiochus Epiphanes basically went in there and made Judaism illegal. It was a capital offense. Anybody that got caught observing Jewish law, the Torah, was murdered. He particularly murdered women who would circumcise their children. As soon as they would have a baby and they circumcised them, he would murder the mom, and then he would murder the baby. Okay, it was a capital offense to have anything to do with the temple, and what he did, he cleared out the temple just like Brian described. He literally vacated everything out of the temple and erected an image of Zeus in there. So Zeus is a Greek god. I think he's represented, I can't remember exactly. He's kind of half man, half animal, if I remember correctly. But I don't know. I don't really study that stuff too much. But he put an image of him there in about 167 BC. He himself asked the high priest, who at that time was Onias, he asked the high priest to sacrifice a pig on the altar at the temple. Onias refused, and he murdered Onias right there. And then he himself sacrificed the pig on the altar. Antiochus Epiphanes. This is how evil this dude was. He himself sacrificed that pig, threw its blood all over the temple, all over the altar, everything. Desecrated that place. Nobody was going to do anything with that temple after that. It was bad enough with that symbol of Zeus in there. So that's how he trampled it. And that's how he trampled down the stars. The prince of the host is likely Onias. Okay, that he would even be as great as to make himself the priest, the high priest over that temple. So that's likely a reference to Onias himself. And here's the consequence. The regular burnt offerings were taken away from him, Onias. The place of the sanctuary was overthrown. So that's how he defiled it. That's how he became the abomination which causes desolation. The abomination was the sacrificing of a pig and the erection of Zeus in the temple. The desolation is nobody's going to touch that temple. Now, Brian mentioned the Maccabees. Anybody know the Maccabees? Anybody heard of the Maccabees? A little bit? Okay. Not something we study as Protestants. The Maccabees books are in the Catholic Bible. So if you ever got a Catholic version Bible, you're going to find these intertestamental books between the Old and New Testament. Some of which are the Maccabees book. There's 1st and 2nd Maccabees, and they cover this time period from 175 to 134 BC. And in that, they record exactly the date that Antiochus Epiphanes sacrificed erected that statue of Zeus. It was 25 Kislev, 168 BC. So they know exactly when it was. And they were revolting against him by this time, and they were getting slaughtered at this time. They would eventually win. But Antiochus would do these things. He would trample down the Jews. He would make the burnt offering cease. He would corrupt and overthrow the place of the sanctuary, and all the hosts were given together, the regular burnt offerings, because of the transgression. It would be thrown to the ground. So everything is just decimated. And then he asked him, okay, how long is this going to be? And he says, for as long as the vision concerning the regular burnt offerings, the transgression that makes desolate, the giving over of the sanctuary and the host to be trampled under, he said, it will be 2,300 days. So he erected the statue of Zeus, 25th Kislev, 168 BC. The Maccabees goes on to say that they lit the first menorah. After they cleansed the temple, after they beat Antiochus Epiphanes, they kind of drove the Greek Empire out of Israel. The lighting of the menorah happened on the 25th of Kislev, 165 BC. If you know your Hebrew calendar and you do the math, guess how many days that is? Only 300. So from the time he stood Zeus in the temple to the time they cleaned it up and lit the first menorah, that was the oil that burned for 8 days, 2,300 days. And it took actually the murder and of course the assassination of Antiochus and the murder of many, many Jews as they rebelled against him to ever get to that point. It was a devastating time. Devastating time. Okay? So that was his vision. That's what he got to see. That's what Daniel got to see. And again, he saw this in 551 BC. All this stuff is future for you. And he does know, all right, it's only going to last 2,300 days. So it's not going to last forever. But then he said, I was troubled, and I sought to understand this. When I had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. Behold, there stood before me one that had the appearance of a man. So, again, there's something supernatural about this vision. Because first off, Daniel starts in Babylon in this chapter. He ends in Babylon in this chapter. But somehow he's going to interact with somebody he doesn't identify, called the man on the canal, several hundred miles away. So there's something very supernatural going on here, how he's encountered this vision. And he hears this man's voice between the banks of the Uli Canal. So the man is literally on the water. He's in the water. And he calls and says, hey, Gabriel, make this man understand this vision. So I'll ask you again. I asked you last time. Who is the man? That's a great question. It's either God's direct voice or this is the appearance of Jesus, the Messiah, talking. And there's only a couple of possibilities here of the man because he gives Gabriel a command. Gabriel is in the echelon of angels. Gabriel's only second in command. You got Michael, then you got Gabriel. They have distinct roles. We're going to see this as we get into the later chapters of Daniel. So it can only be a couple of people. Right? And likely it's God himself. And he said that he stood there and he was frightened and he fell on his face. He said to me, understand, O son of man, the vision is for the time of the end. So, to understand Daniel chapter 8, you have first got to understand what he just said. The time of the end. Now, I want to do something real quick. Anybody read ahead in Daniel? A little bit? Okay. Well, I'm going to jump to Daniel chapter 12. And I'm going to give you a little view of what's to come. Look at the title for Daniel chapter 12. Daniel chapter 12 is all about this phrase, the time of the end. Okay? It's a prophetic phrase. It's throughout several Old Testament major prophets. The time of the end. And it says this, and there at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. There's the echelon of angels. There shall be time of trouble, such as never been seen, such as never been since there was a nation till that time. Now, this is the 12th chapter of Daniel. We're well into the 4th empire now. But at that time, time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book of life. Many of those who fall asleep, the dust of the earth shall awake, and some to everlasting life, and some to shame to everlasting contempt. What is that? Resurrection. So and judgment. That's the time of the end he's talking about. Okay? The time of the end is at the end of the tribulation period when Jesus returns to take his kingdom, to take his place as king. He will be the fifth and final kingdom. Right? That's very future. That's future for us. It was very, very far future for Daniel. Daniel just saw something that was pretty near term. It was going to be a couple hundred years before Antiochus Epiphanes showed up. So it's kind of near term for Daniel. This is very far term for Daniel and still far term for us. Right? Book of Revelation has to happen here when we get to this phrase, the time of the end. So let's go back. I wanted to emphasize that because we'll get to the wrong chapter. Because what the angel said for him, hey Daniel, what you just saw, O Son of Man, that vision is for the time of the end. Now you have to stop and once you frame this, hey, that vision of what you just saw is for the time of the end. It's for past revelation time. It's for past tribulation time. Or at least into the tribulation time. What did Daniel just see? Didn't he just see something that was going to play out between the Greeks and the Persians and Medes? So how could that be that it's for the time of the end? He just played that out. And he will say in a minute, the ram is the Medes and the Persians, the goat is the Greeks. He's going to say that. But he's going to say what you just saw is for a time way beyond that. So was it Antiochus Epiphanes or was it not? You have to start asking yourself, wait a minute. Are we sure what we just saw? Okay, so, verse 18. And when he spoke to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground, and he touched me and made me stand up. And we want to just blur past that. Well, what is that a picture of? Daniel falling down as if he's dead, and the angel picking him up back up. What is that a picture of? No, it's a picture of the resurrection, isn't it? Right? It's such an obscure thing. We just want to read past it. Oh man, he just passed out. An angel kind of woke him up, slapped him up. Get up, son. This is the key differentiator. When is the resurrection going to happen? So don't blow past verse 18 without realizing, hey, there's something symbolic about what the angel just told him and what just experienced in falling to the ground as though dead, and then the angel lifted him up. So he says to him, behold, I will make known to you what shall be in the latter end of the indignation. For it refers to the appointed time of the end. There he says it again, second time. I'm going to tell you what this means, Daniel. But it's going to apply to the time when sin, what this says, the indignation, when sin is finished. Is really what that means. The latter end of indignation. Another Old Testament prophetic term, which means one day sin will be full, God will bring his judgment, and it will be done with. Y'all know that's the timeline we're after? God's going to eventually get tired of sin. Yeah, he's enough's enough. The other part of that is God's going to fulfill his great call to the Gentile world, that as many Gentiles as going to be saved will have been saved. Done deal. Revelation will start at that point. Okay? So this, what you just saw, Daniel, refers to, or behold, is part of that time. The end time. Again, we're confused, right? I thought he was just fixing to explain to this that this was something near between Greeks and the Medo-Persians. So pay very, very close attention to these next few verses. Here's what he says. He's just set the time frame way out there. Here's what he says though. The ram you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of the Medes and Persians. Got it. The goat, the king of his eyes was the first king. We know that was Alexander the Great. History played that out for us. We can look back and see that very clear. For the horn that was broken, the place where 4 rose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. Okay, we're going to stop right here. How many kingdoms do we get out of the death of Alexander the Great? 4. How many kings were there? So it's king to kingdom, 1 to 1, right? And I already told you who they were. I mean, in history, there was 4 dudes. They took 4 kingdoms. You got 1 king and his kingdom. And that's what he just said. Each of the 4 arose. 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation. So you got 1 to 1 there. Go with me? Everything's clear. But look at verse 23. There really needs to be a new paragraph here at verse 23. The English authors, it's not this way in probably in the Hebrew Bible these days. I don't read Hebrew, so I don't know. There should be a new paragraph here. Because listen to what he says. And at the latter end of their kingdom. Their plural, kingdom singular. Has no connection to king singular and kingdom plural. 4 kingdoms. At the latter end of their kingdom, when transgressions have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. There is a distinct connection. There's a total switch of context and meaning between verse 22 and verse 23 that Hebrew authors will tell you this is a new thought. Hebrew Christians will tell you this is a new thought. Okay, and it's a new time frame. Because when transgressions had reached their limit, did transgressions reach their limit in the Greek Empire? Persian Empire? No, we had the Romans coming, man. We're still sinning by that time. Was sin finished with the Roman Empire? Did sin finish with the death and resurrection of Jesus? He paid the price for it. Did sin go away? Sin's still going on, isn't it? One day sin will reach its limit. We haven't got there yet, have we? So who is this king who will arise at the time when sin will reach its limit? Well, I tell you what, it's not Antiochus Epiphanes. Because he had his joy going crazy over the Jews and sins continuing. This latter days of their kingdom, who is this there that's ruling a kingdom? Well, tell me, who is it? Where will we connect it? Did we ever see a consortium of kings ruling a kingdom? Anybody remember Daniel chapter 7? Anybody remember Daniel chapter 2, the 10 toes? There will be a time when there will be a 10-king federation that will lead a one-world kingdom. Remember that? And out of the 10 comes the 11th. He takes down 3, so you have 8. Fingers coordination going on through all that. So this reference here in verse 23 is not to Antiochus Epiphanes. This reference is to the real Antichrist. And he will one day rule one world kingdom. And it will come about when transgression has hit its limit and God is ready to deal with the world in his wrath. Now, verse 24, 25 is the description of him, not Antiochus Epiphanes. He says 14 things about this one king, or this one ruler of the kingdoms. He says 14 things about the one who will rise out of him. The king with bold face. His power shall be great, but not his own power. He shall cause fearful destruction and shall succeed in what he does and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By cunning he will take. By cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes. Okay? Take note there. Antiochus Epiphanes rise against? The prince of hosts. This guy is going to rise against the prince of princes. That's a direct reference to the Messiah. And he shall be broken, but by no human hands. Okay, there's 14 things he says. And I'm not going to go through all 14, but I'm just going to point out a couple. And to know that it's not Antiochus Epiphanes. The one I just mentioned. That when he rises up against, he's going to rise up against the prince of princes. That's not what it said about Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay, so it's not him. And he shall destroy many, and he shall die by no human hand. So who's going to kill him if he's not going to die by no human hand? God himself. The Messiah. When Jesus comes to take this place, the one thing he's going to do is destroy the Antichrist himself. And that's all mentioned in the Old Testament scriptures as well as Revelation. So who is this person? This person is the real Antichrist. And the angel Gabriel tells him, Daniel, this vision of the evenings and the mornings has been told is true. So what I told you about there, the 23rd mornings, that's true. But seal up this vision, for it refers to many days from now. So how does this work? Well, Antiochus Epiphanes is a prototype. That's where Jesus says, when you see the abomination caused of desolation that Daniel spoke of, you better think through it. Because it's not Antiochus Epiphanes back there in 175 BC. He's just a prototype. He's going to show you what it looks like. But there's going to come a time when a real Antichrist is going to arise, and he's going to do much more devastation on the Jews than Antiochus Epiphanes ever did. Okay? So the Old Testament writings that are connected here by reference say that 2/3 of the Jews will be killed during that time. You know how many Jews there are in the world today? Tens of millions. They're all going to be gathered into Israel one day. 2/3 of them will be murdered by this Antichrist. That's what Zechariah says. I don't know how you murder that many people. How you murder that many people?
Hitler murdered a bunch of them.
Yeah, he murdered like 6 million. So this guy's going to murder a lot more than that. Well, the way he does it is in the description up there. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. Guess who's going to fuel him in power? Yeah. This is going to be a very spiritual thing. The power that this guy's going to have is going to be akin to Samson. Matter of fact, some of the same verbs up here and adjectives that are used of Samson. You know what was supernatural about Samson? No way could any human do what Samson did. He killed 1,000 people with a jawbone of a donkey. There's no way a human being could do that. He destroyed a huge building with his own hands. He did things that nobody could do, human speaking. That's the way this guy's going to be. It's the same descriptions of him, but in a greater sense. So this is not Antiochus Epiphanes. The key is to know that he's going to die by no human hands. The Messiah himself is going to kill him. And Antiochus Epiphanes was killed just in battle. I don't know who killed him, but he died in battle with Maccabean revolt. All right? So, to understand this vision, you have to understand that Antiochus Epiphanes was a prototype. The time that this is going to play out again is still future for us. It was way future for Daniel. It's still future for us. We have not seen the rise of 10-king federation that's going to trample the world. We have not seen the rise of a man that's going to have such powerful destruction that he will destroy 1/3 of a nation, or 2/3 of a nation. Now, I've never seen that. Even in Hitler and all his craziness, he didn't have quite that kind of power. But this guy will. And he will set himself up against the Messiah himself. That'll be the distinguishing mark. Not only would he oppose Jesus, he will even claim himself to be the alternate Messiah. He will literally claim himself to be God. Okay? And Antiochus Epiphanes was a weirdo. His name even meant the manifest of God, but he never claimed that he was Yahweh. He never did that. He just claimed he was some sort of deity. Okay? Now, I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for many days. Then I rose and went about the king's business. But I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. Here's the point that I do believe that Daniel was still in Babylon, although he saw this play out in Susa several hundred miles away, because he went right back to the king's business. Okay? And he was appalled and did not understand it. I don't think Daniel was able to register this himself. I don't think he had any context to understand the ram and the goat, to understand these transitions between Antiochus Epiphanes as a prototype to the real Antichrist. I don't think he had any concept of that. But the angel told him something very important. Right there in verse 26. This vision of the evening and mornings is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days. Why do you think he told him that? Seal up the vision.
Because it was so far into the future.
Okay? What does it mean to seal something up in that culture? It was very far in the future. He had to say it. What's Jesus going to get whenever he starts the tribulation? What does he get handed to himself? Handed to him? Anybody read Revelation?
4 seals or something?
7. He's handed a scroll. And on the scroll there are 7 seals. And the 7 seals are what God wrote probably in eternity past of how he was going to bring about this fulfillment of the final transgression. When transgression would finally be dealt with. And Jesus has handled that scroll. And he cracks those 7 seals. And God's judgment is poured out on the earth. That's what he told him to do to this vision. Document it into a scroll and seal it up. Because it refers to many days from now. And Daniel didn't even understand it. Later on, the angel will say, knowledge is going to increase in the latter days, and they will understand this. They will break the seal and understand the times we're in. Guess who's breaking the seal and understanding the times of this end? Us, right? This is for us. Daniel had to write this down for us. We have to understand these times to do just what Brian said, have an urgency about being the light of the world. What if we didn't understand this? We're just going about our daily lives. Will we have a sense of urgency about being the light to a lost world? A sense of urgency of telling lost people that Jesus saves? Not so sure. Right? So this sealed document, this sealed vision has now been opened for the church to give her a sense of urgency to be the light of the world. To be that menorah that opens the temple that lights its way to the Messiah. Lights its way to God our Creator. We are that menorah. We are the product of this vision that he sealed up. All right. What's next in Daniel's 9th chapter is his response to all these visions he's seen. If you've not read the 9th chapter, I want you to read it. I want you to read it many times. It is probably the most powerful chapter in the whole book. It is definitely the climax of the whole book. And it's basically how Daniel responds to his time in Babylon, to his time in Persia and the Persian Empire, and his time reading God's Word. Because all the time that he's been receiving these visions, he's also been reading the book of Jeremiah, which came up in his time. And reading the books of his contemporaries, like Ezra. Well, Ezra would be after him, but like Jeremiah and Ezekiel. He's reading those books, and even Isaiah's book. He would have copies of that. And his response to all that is chapter 9. Chapter 9 is the climax. We often get the climax of this book mixed up. Because if you were to go tell somebody, what's the most memorable point of the book of Daniel, what would you pick? Somebody asked you ever read Daniel? Yeah, I've read it. Well, what would you learn? What would you tell them? Daniel and the lion's den?
Ties right into Revelation.
Oh yeah, sure, it ties right into Revelation. It's the Old Testament copies of Revelation, right? Well, we would all say, hey, it's got a real cool story about Daniel being thrown in the lion's den. That's the most famous story in the book. We'd all talk about the 4 boys being thrown in the fire. They walked through the fire furnace and, Jesus showed up. We mentioned that. I bet most of you couldn't, and me too, couldn't tell anybody what Daniel chapter 9 about. And it is by far the climax of the book. So, you need to read it. You need to read it a lot. And it needs to become your heart. It needs to become my heart. That's what I want. I want the kind of heart that's revealed in Daniel 9. Because it's his response to everything he's experienced and everything's going through his life and why God picked him. Really cool revelation, pretty much, why God picked him. So read that because we're going to tear into it next time we meet. All right. Any comments, questions?